I'm so happy that it worked. So as I said, everyone, welcome. This is episode 12 of Good Talk, New Lines Magazine's Instagram live series of conversations. My name is Riada Akil, and it is truly my honor and privilege to host Ron Haviv today. He's an Emmy-nominated, award-winning photojournalist, co-founder of the photo agency 7, dedicated to documenting conflict and raising awareness about human rights issues around the globe. And in the last 3 decades, Mr. Haviv has covered more than 25 conflicts and worked in over 100 countries, published at least 3 critically acclaimed books and collections of photography. And his work has been featured in numerous museums and galleries, including the Louvre, Council of Foreign Relations, United Nations. And his work in the Balkans and in Bosnia in particular, but all over the region, which spanned over a decade of conflict at the end of the 20th century, was used as an evidence to indict and convict war criminals at the Hague International Tribunal. Your list of accomplishments is so much longer in terms of your documentary work. You're a central figure of 6 documentary films, Ron, and you have provided expertise and consultation on TV and in different projects. So again, I want to reiterate that it's a huge privilege. I'm happy that you found time to join us. Welcome. Ron is a very kind person as well, so I want to add that to that introduction. How are you today, Ron?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to say to our audience just briefly how we recently met in person as a start of the conversation. It was at USCP and U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. here, where I went and attended the exhibition Imagine Reflections on Peace. And the exhibition features work of world-renowned journalists and authors, scholars who take us into societies who have survived conflict and survived the war, at least. How they're dealing with peace is a completely different question. And the project is about rebuilding in Bosnia, Cambodia, Colombia, Lebanon, Northern Ireland, Rwanda. So when I went to that exhibition, I saw some photos that are very familiar to those who have followed Bosnian war or who happen to be from the Balkans. I have seen those photos many times, and so I was particularly shocked or surprised. This is a book, by the way, that we will talk about. I was shocked and surprised when all these photos that I have seen and that were so familiar to me were so disturbing in a way that I had a very visceral bodily reaction to them. These are the photos that Ron took in 1990s. As you see here, this is the most famous one of Hamieta Payaziti along with Aisha Shabanovic, and they were pulled by Tigers paramilitary forces in Bijeljina in eastern Bosnia in 92. I came to Ron, and he was very kind. I asked him, and so I want to ask you now again, for our audiences as well. This emotional reaction is obviously very expected. These emotional responses were also proven by scientists to be scientifically measurable, even in the terms of viewers' neural responses. You've had probably many of such reactions from the audience, Ron. I'm curious about your opinion also, and have you had contact with families of people who have been in your photographs as well, and what were those encounters like?
I think it's, your experience, as many others, not only with my work, but with other parts of the work, certainly of Imagine and other work that photojournalists has done, is a testament to the power of photography, of what it can do. And it's pretty incredible. And in regards specifically to my work, and specifically the work in Bosnia, I'm currently co-directing a documentary called Biography of a Photo with Lauren Walsh. And we're going and examining that actual photograph on Bijeljina, and we have been showing it to people from the region. And many of the people had very similar reactions. People broke down crying. Sometimes we didn't even have to show the photograph. Just talking about the photograph brought back memories of the war and their different experiences and so on. And it's been pretty amazing to be able to document that and experience that. And in relation to the question about families, people in the photographs or people from the photographs, specifically with these pictures from Bosnia, with Bijeljina, we have spent a great deal of time with the daughter of Aisha Shabanovic and her husband, Alma and Sayad Pekovic, who are currently trying to indict the Tigers in the photograph for war crimes based on the evidence of the photograph. And again, it's now 30 years later, and still that these photographs have the ability to have power and to have resonance, and something that Lauren and I are exploring in Biography of a Photo, just kind of talking about that as a photograph moves from its initial attempt to give information as a news photograph and has now become a historical document. That photograph, maybe some of your audience might know, has been used in The Hague, in the ICTY, to indict and convict people of war crimes. And in fact, actually, when The Hague opened, one of the opening speeches, one of the prosecutors said that that photograph was one of the inspirations for the creation of The Hague. So sometimes photography can really have incredible power.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm now learning also about the documentary that you're working on. I'm sure that it's going to bring even more information to this subject. And we mentioned this Imagine as the project and as the exhibition. And the project consists of the book. There's that exhibition. There's the educational part of it. And so I wanted to ask you to explain to us a little bit more about the impetus for this project and the book, and that question behind it, which is, why is it so difficult to make a good piece when it is so easy to imagine it? So yeah. What did you and your colleagues have in mind when you started this project from a variety of these countries that I mentioned?
That's a simple question with incredibly difficult answers. And this project is the brainchild of the Seven Foundation co-founder with myself, Gary Knight. And Gary came back from covering conflict in Iraq quite a while ago, because this project has been working on it for a long time, and had wanted to say, like, what happens when the bullets stop flying? We, as the news photographers and journalists, stop going back to those countries and stop discussing what happened next. Did the peace work? Did it not? What is the definition of peace? And what is considered a successful peace? So he came up with this idea to try and basically, in some ways, almost like a guidebook of saying, this is what these countries did, this is what they did right, this is what they did wrong or are doing wrong. Perhaps they can learn from each other, going all the way back to Cambodia, Northern Ireland, to countries as recent as Colombia and even Afghanistan, which is essentially at peace today. And we explore all these different things. And so what we did was we sent back writers and photographers that covered the countries at war to define what peace is. And then we brought in people that negotiated peace. The person that helped negotiate the peace for Northern Ireland, and people who were experts in legal ideas. And then also the people themselves, people from Rwanda, people from Bosnia and elsewhere, to give their voices to create this book, which is a pretty amazing book. It's not a photo book. Photography is a good part of it, but there's amazing essays across the realm of the book. It's available on Amazon and also on reflectionsonpeace.org. We also have the book translated into Spanish as well as Bosnian. It's available for free download in Bosnian. And also, aside from the exhibition and the book, we have a series of short films directed by Fiona Turner, as well as a educational curriculum by Generation Human Rights, which is there to hopefully teach the next generation to avoid making the same mistakes that their parents made. And so you have also, you have dedicated your life to documenting conflicts around the world, and you documented at least 3 genocides in your career and many other as horrific crimes. And so that phrase, never again, right, which we've heard in Bosnia, but and in different contexts, actually happens again in different places. And I've read in several of your previous interviews how you have sometimes felt this feeling of disappointment after you at different times had maybe hoped that your work would spur a different, stronger intervention, or that it would in a way stop the killing. So how did you change, or how do you see that your maybe profession has changed throughout these decades of your work, Ron? Well, those are 2 different questions. The first question about kind of the reaction of what I would hope my work would do has varied. Sometimes there's a reaction very quickly. I took a photograph in Central America, in Panama, which the United States then used as one of the justifications for invading Panama to overthrow the dictator. So that had kind of a very quick reaction. It wasn't whether I agreed with the intervention or not, but it was kind of understanding that photography can play that role. And then with the photographs from Bielina of actual war crimes, were ignored by the world for many, many years, but eventually started to have some sort of impact. And I think that what we as a journalistic community, and certainly myself as an individual photographer, have to understand is that I don't think that any one photograph can stop a war. But anything that we can do to have impact for the better, anything that we can do to kind of change something on the ground or provide information, be part of that communications project to have some sort of impact at some point is incredibly valuable. And I think that we look at, especially in terms of documenting war crimes, where photography has and journalism has played such an important role, whether ethnic cleansing or the prison camps in Bosnia or things in Iraq or elsewhere, it does have impact. It doesn't have the impact that we would all love, peace on earth and goodwill towards everyone. That's unfortunately a little bit unrealistic based on the way that human beings work. But I think that everything we can do can be incredibly helpful. And as photography has changed, as technology has changed photography over the course of certainly my last 30 years, it enables us now to reach more people faster, quicker, people to consume photography, and also the fact that everybody themselves are photographers. Everybody's taking pictures. So I think people are looking at photography in a different way now than they certainly were maybe 30 years ago.
That is a perfect lead to my question. Do you think that, or how much more difficult is it for a photograph to become iconic in the digital era? Everything has changed in terms of both the media consumption and the way that it is produced. There is an ongoing avalanche, it seems, that keeps circulating in the digital sphere. And one photograph seems to be incredibly powerful in terms of the public reaction to it, but then it disappears. The new one comes along. So I'm just curious from your professional opinion about this idea of iconization of photographs today, considering the medium and change that's been going on with digitalization of everything.
Well, I think the definition of iconic is different than the definition of viral. Right? Viral is something goes very everywhere. Everybody's liking it, swiping it, so on and so on. Iconic is actually over a long period of time. The photograph has to be created in one genre, let's say in terms of my photographs, in terms of news photographs, and then slowly they move to other parts of society. They become part of politics, they become part of art, education, there's maybe commercialization of the photograph, they become part of the language, they become symbolic of something. So the Bielina photograph is now used to discuss war crimes in general. It's representative of war crimes, not just Bosnian war crimes. But that's taken 30 years for that photograph to kind of move through the different things. So it's a little bit early now to say what photographs of the digital age can become iconic, but certainly in terms of becoming viral and having impact, I think we can all look back at some photographs that should be recognizable. We look at the photograph of the poor child, Aylan Kurdi, who died on the beach during the migrant crisis. And that photograph had a lot of impact. It had impact, especially in Germany, as Chancellor Merkel remarked on the photograph and was said to be affected that she changed or modified her policy on accepting migrants based on the struggle that was represented in this one photograph. So that is incredible about the power, again, the power of photography. It has to work hand in hand with other things going on at the same time, but photography can have that ability to kind of move the needle in one direction.
Speaking of moving the needle in one direction or the other, Ukraine comes to my mind, and I'm curious, have you been to Ukraine? What are your observations? What have you seen there? When did you go? And would you like to comment or share your opinion about the current, well, not current, very recent, I don't know, controversy, brouhaha that came out with President Zelensky and First Lady Olena Zelenska, who, were photographed by Anna Leibovitz for Vogue. And there was a lot of both support by those who said, well, there's nothing wrong about this. It was his role and duty to keep the attention. And then others, both on the right and the left, for different reasons in the United States and around the world, who are saying, is this what we are supporting? Is this romanticizing war? Why did he do this? This is a faux pas, etc. So can you tell me first about your impressions from Ukraine, in case you've been there, and your thoughts about this Vogue shoot?
Well, my impressions for Ukraine, I was in Ukraine for about the first 4 months of the war. In fact, several of the photographs appear in the exhibition, which I just wanted to mention is not only in Washington, just closed in Washington, but is currently at the National Gallery in Sarajevo. and we'll be in Belgrade this coming fall, as well as we're hoping to be at the United Nations in New York coming soon. And we have photographs from Ukraine and elsewhere to talk about the impact of refugees and so on the peace process. But my experience in Ukraine was like many who thought that the Ukrainians would lose quite quickly, like many people thought the Bosnians would lose quite quickly, and were amazingly surprised that the Ukrainians were able to defend themselves, obviously with an incredible amount of help from the world. And this is a conflict which I believe is, like many others, is a proxy war between the West and the former and Russia, and we have to see what's going to happen. This war is at the moment nowhere near over, and it is something that I think, as you only have to look at your phone, look at your newspaper, and so on, you see that Ukraine is no longer constantly on the top of the news, right? It has fallen behind. It's now, another battle, another town fell, another war crime, and people are now so used to it, given that it's been going on now for more than 5 months. So there's a real danger, given that Ukraine is primarily surviving not only on their own ability to defend themselves, but on support from the West, which comes primarily from the public being on the Ukrainian side. So leading into this question about Vogue, I absolutely think there's absolutely nothing wrong with the president and the first lady appearing in Vogue, because it's important that many people, not all, but certainly many readers of Vogue, probably heard about Ukraine, not really paying attention. They're not focused. Their life is in fashion and arts and so on. And now all of a sudden, you're being exposed to something else in the world through a magazine that you think is incredibly important, which Vogue is in the fashion world. And I think that is very important to keep up the world attention on what's going on. What is our responsibility as world citizens, whether you agree or disagree? I mean, you can have either side, but it is important that conversation continues to happen as this war continues to happen. So I think that the criticisms of Annie's pictures and certainly of Zelensky and his wife is unfounded. I think the photographs were done in good taste. The fashion aspect of it was very minimal, and I think that without question, I mean, I also spent some time with the president photographing him for the cover of The Economist. He's a very important person in this conflict, and he is very much symbolic of what the Ukrainians are doing.
I read an article which was published in 2006, but it's still available online on Gariba Mag. It's called "Suffering for Sale." But some of the questions that were pointed out there or themes seem still very relevant, and I wish to ask your opinion about it. And in that essay, it said, quote, "There is the assumption that when an image is published in the news media, it is there to raise awareness, to educate media consumers around the world about the world. In the art world, these photographs become objects for individual consumption. It raises the question, is it ethical to sell pictures portraying other people's suffering? Is it ethical to buy them?"
Yeah, I think it's a very good conversation. I can give you answers on both sides of those. I mean, I do sell my work. Certainly the work that was referenced in the Guernica magazine, the proceeds, some of the proceeds were given to UNICEF, certainly of a photograph from Darfur, which is mentioned in that article. And I've raised a lot of money for, at the time, the displaced people of Darfur through the selling of the print. But I've also used some of that money for myself to be able to go and continue doing this kind of work. I think for myself that my belief with these photographs, and I do believe that they should be seen in context, whether in a gallery wall or a museum wall, or in Instagram or Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever, you should always know exactly what you're seeing, not just something that's pretty, even though it could be a pretty version of something horrible that's happening. You as the audience should appreciate what you're looking at. And with that idea in mind, that given that the way that people consume imagery now is so fragmented, that it used to be, especially in the United States, if you had photographs in a magazine that was called Life, which everybody looked at, then you would be able to have a real effect on public opinion. Today, nothing like that exists. So my work, in order for it to have impact, needs to appear on your phone, on your TV, on your computer, on a physical piece of paper, on the wall of a museum, in a gallery, in somebody's home who's having a party to show people I care about this subject, and so on. That's the only way we can do it. It has to be a multi-platform kind of way of seeing it. Otherwise, photographs will be forgotten. Last year, as Lauren Walsh likes to remind me, over 1 trillion photographs were taken. So how do you get your work to rise above that 1 trillion, to actually mean something? Because we, in our world as photojournalists, we are there. The first thing we're trying to do is to give information for you as the viewer to take that information, either vote differently or support someone or something with funds, or just become a more globally educated citizen and be able to hopefully make things a little bit better. That's the primary thing. It's like, look at what's happening. I am your eyes, and that's why I'm there. So wherever they appear, that's what works for me, and that overrides everything for me.
Thank you for sharing those insights, especially from your perspective, so that we understand different side of it, right? But speaking of the ethical aspect, Ron, I wondered, how have you managed those questions in your work? This year, for example, June 8th marked 50 years since the South Vietnamese photographer Nick Ut took that famous photo of the, at the time, 9-year-old Napalm girl, quote unquote, and Kim Phuc Phan Thi wrote in the New York Times about it this 2 months ago, I guess, in the beginning of June, and she described different feelings throughout her life, both about shame and embarrassment of her disfigurement, as she said, and at the time, how it changed throughout life, how it was non-linear, right? Both the difficulties of navigating private and emotional life. And she wrote in that New York Times article, and she said, I quote, "Photographs by definition capture a moment in time, but the surviving people in these photographs, especially the children, must somehow go on. We're not symbols, we are human. We must find work, people to love, communities to embrace, places to learn and to be nurtured." End of quote. And of course, she today is an activist. She is raising the awareness. She's embraced her power, so to speak, because of her story and background. And just to say, related to this book, actually, and the question of the consent, it was so not fascinating, but very interesting for me to read in this book, the reflection by Elvis Gariba, who was subjected to torture in concentration camp in Bosnia. And he writes very clearly how when he saw you at Ternopolje camp, he was 19 years old. He writes of that encounter in August, and he said he decided to take his shirt off when he saw you, in the hope, quote, as he says, that I would get their attention and have my picture taken, then my family would know the last place I had been if I were to disappear, as countless others already had. So it reminded me about the complexity of this idea of consent, right?
It's incredibly complex. It's very, very difficult, and certainly in the majority of these situations, there is no time or capability to be able to ask people for consent as things are happening. Obviously, certainly as, let's say, with Elvis, who was a prisoner, he had no rights, and our goal as a photographer, as a journalist, going to these camps was to expose what was happening there, to try to help not only him but everybody. And it's this idea about the greater good versus the individual. And you go back to the photograph from Bielina of this very famous photograph, and you have the woman's daughter. Who is seeing this photograph published almost every month somewhere. The picture becomes more and more famous, but her mother's story becomes less and less known because it becomes more of a symbol. It's not so much about her mother. It's the worst. She said to us when Lauren and I interviewed her for the film, "This is my most worst moment, documented, and I have to relive this over and over again." It's incredibly powerful and heartbreaking for me to hear, but at the same time, she also acknowledges the benefit and the power and what the photograph has done and what she also hopes the photograph will do in the future. And so based on my conversations with her and also with other people that I have photographed that have been in the pictures or relatives of people in the pictures, that I lean on the side of that I will photograph people in the most respectful and dignified way that I can. And certainly if somebody tells me that they don't want their picture taken, I will not do it. But if they don't, I am there to document, and I'm trying to do something that will not only help them, but their community and the world on the bigger level. But it is, without question, it is a very difficult conversation. And it's a conversation in the photojournalism community and the world today, where protesters are like, don't photograph my face. I don't want you to say to people that I'm here, and so on. And you have this real battle of like, then why are you protesting if you don't want anybody to know that you're here? We're here to amplify your voices. And I still believe in the power of photography and the power of photography for something good.
Incredibly complex conversations. And now that, I mean, we are in United States, I'm in United States at least at the moment, maybe you as well. It reminds me of another aspect beyond this idea of consent of the person whose photo is being taken. When it comes to US, we're talking about another important discussion related to gun control and the debate over the use of visuals in the aftermaths of mass shootings, for example. And recently we had Uvalde in Texas, and there were a lot of articles and essays in the media arguing yes and no in terms of showing or not showing the gruesome images of violence, especially this, we're talking about kids as well. I'm curious about your opinion about this. What do you think about publishing the photos that show this true impact of gun violence in the case of the United States, for example?
I think it's incredibly important that we do show it. I think we look at a similar case where there was arguments about during the Gulf War, the Iraq War, and the Afghanistan War about just showing the coffins coming home. That the administrations didn't want people to see plane load of American soldiers coming back in coffins, right? Because they didn't want the American people to lose their support of what was going on, and because they wouldn't realize the true toll. Numbers are one thing. Thousands of people have died, 18 people killed in a school. Those numbers are very hard to comprehend, but if you see a child, and it doesn't have to be a gruesome photograph at all. It doesn't even have to be the face of the child. It can be something as simple as a hand next to a book or some symbol like that, that basically enables you as the viewer to empathize in a way that perhaps you weren't before. And I think that we have already seen that there is such a struggle now over the idea of gun violence, that while there's great work on survivors of gun violence, perhaps the next thing that we need to do is show the reality of what this looks like in real life, in a way that is acceptable and emotional, not in a way that is gruesome and exploits the victims.
I can't believe the 30 minutes has almost passed. This has been incredible in terms of the insights. What are you working on at the moment besides that documentary, Ron? What can we expect from you?
Well, we're doing lots of great things at the Seven Foundation. So please visit the7foundation.org and also reflectionsonpeace.org to see where the exhibition is coming to and about the book. And please also get a copy of the book. We're quite proud of it. We think it can have real impact. And we at the foundation, at the Seven Agency, as well as myself, are going to continue creating work that makes you think and hopefully betters the world in a little bit better way.
Thank you so much again. I appreciate your time, all these insights about so many incredibly complex conversations. Maybe we can come again together in a few months or so to hear about your documentary. To all of you in the audience, this will be posted next week on all of our social media platforms. And stay tuned for more good talks with people from all over the globe. Have a good day, and thank you, Ron, again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.